And the quid pro quo then for the United Auto Workers as a union specifically and the auto companies was, okay, recognize us and we can, in effect, get rid of your turnover costs, which were huge. And how do we do that? If we recognize each other, we have a contract, we have to base it on something. And how we stop turnover is the longer we stay, the more we get. And so ownership of a job, ownership, that word ownership came into our language. I own a job. Now literally do I own a job? No, but there was a vested interest in that job. And a one-page contract, the start. So the longer I stayed, the more I got. And so everything started being attached to my seniority. Longer stay, more I got. And that then, for this time period, became the power source. We fought many wars on the issue of seniority. We fought many issues, or many wars on the issue of job content, job descriptions, all the things that were supportive of a seniority-based system. Well, we're in a different world now, and that now is going. As I did when I negotiated the contract with my fellow people at Michigan State recently, and we dealt with seniority. Seniority wasn't applicable. If I was going to lay off in a department and I had a historian, I had an agricultural engineer, I had a vet tech, who goes first? Who's more valuable? I can't make a distinction. And it isn't going to be based upon seniority, because if I only have one historian and I lay he or she off, then history isn't taught. And it's certainly not going to be taught by the agricultural engineer. So we had to make modifications, and that's what's happening over time. But now at this time period, seniority is the foundation for, and you can imagine now, if you think about the wars, all of the myths and realities we hear about seniority, you know, we can't get rid of them because they're high seniority, all of that stuff. Most of that is a myth, but there's some realities to how it got that way. Now, unfortunately, people thought of seniority as a tool of equity. My point in the fourth thing is that seniority is a tool of equity, but it's also a tool to organize around. Why would anybody want to join me unless I got something for joining me? And what I got for that is the longer I stayed, the more I got. And it was an escalating scale. So it was in my interest to stick around. It was in my interest then to support your situation. When that peace started to break politically in Michigan was a number of years ago, when we first heard the word concession. And you talk about anger and frustration within unionized organizations, especially mass production ones, is that when we went into a slide, we went backwards. Well, that's the first time that's ever happened. People never contemplated that the skid could go backwards. Well, it can. It always could. It just never did because of the wealth that we had as a nation. And when it started to slide back, I used to be able to support everything you said as a union, but now I'm angry at you. I'm angry at you because why in the hell did you give away $1 an hour? Well, in large measure, we elected you to make good choices for us, and if you didn't give it, we wouldn't be here. The plant might be in Guadalajara, or whatever the case may be. You made choices that we elected you to do, and yet now we hate you because you made the choices we elected you to do through a democratic process. So again, cyclical, it's starting to break down. But now, this is the choice. This is where it would head in. I'd like you to go over to page 28, and I want to talk about, during this time period, contract administration. We can now use the term contract. We know that during the Kraft period, there were no contracts because no one needed a legally enforceable document to set forth terms and conditions of employment that employers had to live up to. Why? Because if you didn't, I went home. And how did it start here? It started with no contract. And all of a sudden I decided, damn, if we don't write this stuff down and you don't live by it, how do I enforce it? So the first time we had to have a contract. And it started as a one-pager. This just happened to be in one industry. A lot of one-pagers all over. And as time went on during this time period, those contracts grew in size and scope. It covered everything imaginable in here. Everything imaginable. And that led to a lot of frustration too, because members are very funny people. They only read one thing in a contract if they read anything at all. They read the wages. If you go to a ratification meeting, most of them come to hear what's in the wages. They don't care what's in here, and I'm saying your entire life is in here. Your history is in here. Your ability to defend yourself. All of the conditions of that are here. You don't listen. Well, then, as we went through this period, we said, well, maybe we ought to go backwards or forwards. We called it forward. This is my friend from Dayton Power Light, and as I showed you yesterday, but I'll reiterate it again, that all of a sudden, maybe we should live with concepts. Well, Bill put it best yesterday when he said he worked with a lot of folks who, in effect, lived with concepts, and it worked very well. When it ends is when whoever the people were on both sides, one side or the other or both, who were committed to that, say, to hell with you. Now what? Concepts are gone. And all of a sudden I got to go, holy hell, how do I get all this stuff back? Because now I can't trust Mike. So this is the first time we started to see labor contracts, things that in effect, if you will, can be enforceable. This is the first time, as I indicate, that we saw company policies and procedures. First time we had a a labor relations department, or a personnel department as we called it then, and they had to have rules that you guys had to live by. And we said, we don't like those rules, so we got to have a contract to make certain that those rules are modified so we can live with it. And so the term negotiations started. Now there was negotiations, but it was informal. Here it's becoming formal. But most importantly, as my third bullet said, is that the union and management roles developed around the administering of that contract. And as a result, we developed a new set of leadership on both sides for the sole purpose of negotiating and enforcing my life through a written document. That is our sole focus. When I see a union, they say, what's your purpose? Your only purpose is to protect this. Now, I'm not being foolish in protecting it, but this is what my life is about. And so this all came into play. It was never there in the past. Discipline and discharge moved from the union side. That's getting rid of my friend Ty back here. Well, God forbid, now management got to do it. Management said, well, we can discipline and discharge workers. And the union says, well, I don't know about that. You've never done that before. Management says, we don't care. Test us. We own the place now. We hire you. We'll hire the people we want. And out of that came an agreement in a contract that said, yes, you can discipline and discharge, but you must do it by a procedure that we have agreed upon that we considered fair. And so that was embodied in that contract. If you'll go over a page, and we're going to talk about strikes. Now, during the Kraft period, we really didn't have any strikes. The Kraft period that came as a result of, if you will, coming down through, that occurred during mass production and service, yes, we had strikes there, of course, because the conditions have changed. But in pure craft, there wasn't it. There was no need to. I just went home. You couldn't do anything without me. You're dead, man. And we sure in hell didn't teach you how to make a chair, or a barrel, or a piece of pottery, or whatever it was. So all of a sudden, if I've got to enforce this contract, I have to do it some way. And so my information box tells me that what did I start seeing? Mass strikes, mass action, sit-downs. The greatest challenge came in Flint, Michigan with the great sit-down strikes. The auto workers went into the plants. They held the plant, and it happened all over the nation in all different kinds of industries. It happened at what was the old department store before Dayton Hudson's? Well, it was the old Hudson store in Detroit here. They went, it was the clerks at Hudson's. When the auto plants shut them down, they walked into the store and they sat at the counter. They sat down, chained the door shut, and they said, don't do anything. The only thing that saved the day is we had a governor in Michigan called Wagner who decided not to use the National Guard to move them out. He said to General Motors, negotiate with them. And he stood his ground, nobody politically forced him, and what was the result? A recognition. This is what happened. out of all of that pain and agony of seizing those plants, this was the result. Now, you look at it in context today and you say, what the hell does this mean? There were 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 points. It is the first time in our history that a collective management recognized a collective union. A right to exist, a right to bargain, a right to have an agreement that set forth terms and conditions of employment to be followed by management for workers. That is an enormous outcome. So these were all the kinds of things that now started to happen, and very different from the previous period. Now, when I look at all of that, I also found that I came into this, and what was the natural response of management to strikes? Injunctions. Well, other than the public sector, you can't hardly get an injunction anymore against a strike, unless it's a wildcat strike. And then somebody's got to arbitrate the thing under Buffalo Forge to find, don't worry about what that was, Buffalo Forge to find out whether it was an illegal strike or not. And 10 years later, I'm still out there, or somebody's won the strike and it's over with. So all of a sudden, I came into this being a non-political movement. I had courts that didn't like me. I had laws, no laws yet, that supported me. I had judges and politicians that didn't care. So I had unfriendly courts, unfriendly politicians, no supporting law. This was a moment of great change as we moved into mass production. I had to have laws that set forth a framework to protect that contract, that recognition. I had to have judges that would enforce it based upon modern interpretations, and I had to have politicians who would pass the laws and appoint the judges that would be supportive of the workers' rights.